Hi, I'm Callie. I'm the founder of the Dallas Garden School, and this is a quick start guide on how to grow onions in North Texas. Let's get started. The first step in growing onions in North Texas is buying your onion starts. Now, there are 3 different ways to start onions. You can plant seeds, you can plant sets, or you can start with onion plants, also known as onion starts. These are onion starts are the best way to start onions in North Texas. They're just much easier and they're much more reliable, and they look like short, stubby scallions. You can find them locally in garden centers toward the end of January. You can also order them from suppliers like my favorite, Dixondale Onion Farms. They are a Texas-based onion farm, and they send my onion starts directly to me. Now, when you're buying your onion starts, it's very important to make sure that you get the right type of onion. There are 3 different types of onion. There are short day onions, intermediate day onions, or long day onions. Here in North Texas, we can only grow short and intermediate day onions because our day length in the summer doesn't get long enough to grow long day onions like Walla Walla or Copra or Alyssa Craig. Step 2 to growing onions in North Texas is you're going to need to prep your soil. Here in North Texas, most of our soil is thick, heavy, dense clay, and that's not the kind of soil that onions prefer to grow in. Onions like loose, well-draining soil, and so the best way to do that is we need to amend our garden soil. Now, the first and best way to amend your soil is with high quality, well-rotted compost. You can buy compost, you can make your own compost, but what you want to do is before you plant your onions, incorporate a good amount of compost into your beds. Now, if you're starting beds from scratch or you're starting beds from the ground and not in a raised bed, you will probably want to also add expanded shale. This is a product that's great for North Texas clay soils. It helps to improve the soil texture and overall take our thick clay soil and break it up and make it into nice loose soil that onions really like. Of course, you can really improve your garden soil for onions by planting your onions in raised beds. If you are building raised beds for the first time and you're confused about what to fill your raised beds with, my recommendation is a 50-50 blend of topsoil and compost. Can't go wrong with that. So start by prepping your soil with incorporating compost. If you're building a new bed and it's an in-ground bed, you want to add some expanded shale, and then also raised beds are best. Step 3 to planting onions in North Texas is to actually plant the onions. And I get this question all the time, when do you plant onions? Now, typically you want to plant your onions 4 to 6 weeks before your average last frost. Here in North Texas, that's about March 12th, give or take where you are, but it's a good rule of thumb to plant your onions in late January here. That's when I plant, and I always get nice harvest of large, big onion bulbs. When you're planting, spacing is super important because the more space you give your plants, the larger the bulbs will be. In a home garden, 4 to 6 inches of space is a good rule. Now, when you're planting, you also want to plant your onions only 1 inch deep. Any deeper and that soil is going to inhibit the growth of that nice large bulb. Step 4 to growing onions in North Texas is caring for your onion plants. Now, once you plant your onions in late January, it's still going to be kind of cold. They probably won't do much active growth. They may put on some root growth during these cold, wet winter months. But then in early spring, when everything starts to warm up, your onions are going to start to put on active growth. And this is when you need to pay attention to the care for them. Your care for your onions will be 3 main things. The first is watering. And you want to make sure that your onions get about 1 inch of water per week, whether that's from rainfall or whether it's supplemental watering. Then the next thing is once your onions begin active growth, you want to apply a high nitrogen fertilizer every 2 to 3 weeks. There are several different options. Ammonium sulfate is a synthetic fertilizer that also helps to acidify our alkaline North Texas soils. Organic options for high nitrogen fertilizers are blood meal or feather meal. And then in addition to watering and fertilizing is making sure that you're weeding your onion plot regularly. Root crops do not like to compete with weeds, so make sure that you're out there at least once a week, yanking any weeds and keeping your onion plot nice and weed-free. Step 5 to growing onions in North Texas is harvesting. This is the most important and the fun part. It's what you are working towards. Now, we talked a little bit about day length previously. When the day length reaches the optimal number of hours, it will trigger the onions into bulbing. Once the onions start the bulbing process, you want to stop fertilizing, okay? So when you notice that the bulbs are starting to grow, you will stop applying your fertilizer. When to harvest? Now, there's a very easy way to tell when your onions are ready to harvest, and that's when the tops flop. So when you see your onion tops flop over, that's when you know that it's time to harvest your onions. Now, once you pull your onions out of the ground, you will move them into a shaded and protected area, garage, covered porch, anywhere that you can protect it from direct sun, and it can start the curing and drying process. Step 6 of growing onions in North Texas is curing the onions. This is a really important step and something you can't skip over. So make sure you don't rush this process. Give it as much time as your onions need to dry out. This could be 3 to 4 weeks. This could be 4 to 6 weeks. Just make sure that you put your onions into a dark, dry, well-ventilated space. I put my onions onto racks in my garage with a fan on them for nice air circulation. And the purpose of curing is to drive out all of the moisture in the leaves and in the neck of your onion so that there's no moisture once you put them into storage. If there is moisture in that neck, then it's going to lead to onion rot. So the way that you tell that your onions are perfectly cured is when that neck has dried down and there's no slip. If you rub that neck in between your fingers, you can't feel any moisture or slip in that neck. It's just completely dried down. The other way is if you trim the neck of your onion, you want to leave about an inch of neck after you trim. If you trim that neck and there's no green and there's no moisture, then you know that your onions are properly cured and they can move on to storage. Step 7 of growing onions North Texas is to store your onions. And the ideal situation would be to store your onions in a root cellar. Here in North Texas, basements aren't typically a thing, so we really don't have root cellars to store our onions. Now, a better option is to store them in a refrigerator because onions really like to be stored as cold as possible, just barely above freezing. And if you have an extra refrigerator in your garage, that's an ideal place to store your onions. Keeps them nice and cool and they can keep for a long time. If you don't have an extra refrigerator or space in your own refrigerator to store them, then you can store them in a dark, cool cupboard or pantry. This is an okay option. It's not the best. Your onions won't last as long if you stored them in a root cellar or in a refrigerator, but you can store them there if they've been properly cured. Just make sure to use them up quickly because they will start to deteriorate eventually in these room temperature conditions. Okay, the last and final step to growing onions in North Texas is to download and print this 6-page guide that I created for you. It includes a journal page to keep track of your onion planting activities, a step-by-step checklist, all my favorite local resources and supplies that I use, as well as a cheat sheet to help you keep track of onion varieties. So be sure to subscribe to this channel and then also leave me a comment below and let me know if you're interested in seeing more videos like this, or let me know topics in North Texas gardening that are of interest to you. I'll see you soon.